Before the world knew their names, Shanann Watts and Sheri Coleman were simply wives and mothers trying to hold their families together. They weren't killers or suspects or headlines, just women who believed in love, family, and faith. They posted photos, shared laughter, managed households, made plans for tomorrow. And they trusted the men beside them, the men who within days would take everything away. Their stories are not about death. They're about life, how ordinary moments become sacred when viewed through hindsight. How two women, hundreds of miles apart, lived parallel lives that would end under the same shadow. This is not their husband's story. This is theirs. The story of Shanann Watts and Sheri Coleman, two women silenced by lies, but remembered through truth. Shanann Catherine Watts was born in New Jersey in 1984, a dreamer wrapped in discipline. She was diagnosed young with lupus, an illness that often left her exhausted, but she refused to let it define her. She worked hard, first in business, then in health and wellness sales, building a reputation for positivity. Friends remember her as unstoppable, someone who smiled through pain, who turned struggle into inspiration. When she met Chris Watts, she thought she'd finally found peace. He was quiet, gentle, dependable, the opposite of chaos. They married in 2012, built a home in Frederick, Colorado, and started a family. Their daughters, Bella and Celeste, became her world. Online, she shared everything: family trips, bedtime dances, Sunday mornings filled with laughter. Her social media wasn't vanity. It was gratitude. Each post said the same thing in different ways. I made it. I have love. I have hope. To everyone watching, they were perfect. But perfection is often a disguise for exhaustion. Behind her optimism, Shanann was tired of managing bills, health, marriage, and motherhood. She carried the family's emotional weight, while Chris retreated into silence. Still, she believed effort could fix anything. She sent long messages, planned vacations, tried harder. Because for Shanann, love wasn't just a feeling, it was work. And she worked until her last breath. Sheri Ann Coleman lived a life defined by devotion. Born in Illinois in 1977, she grew up in a small Midwestern town where church was the center of community. She met Chris Coleman as teenagers. He was charming, ambitious, protective, the kind of man who promised certainty. They married in 1997, and Sheri followed him into a world of religious prestige. Chris became the head of security for Joyce Meyer Ministries, a global Christian organization. Their lives revolved around faith conferences, charity events, and the image of the perfect Christian family. Sheri took pride in that image. She raised two sons, Garrett and Gavin, decorating their rooms with Bible verses and superhero posters. Neighbors described her as kind, quiet, selfless, the wife who always brought homemade cookies to gatherings. But inside that ministry-shaped bubble, Sheri began to feel small. Chris's confidence became control. His faith became performance. He demanded perfection. The spotless house, the smiling wife, the obedient children. Sheri prayed through the tension, writing in her journal about loneliness and distance. She believed marriage was a covenant to protect, not escape. Like Shanann, she stayed because she believed love could be repaired. Two women, different worlds, one suburban, one spiritual. One chronicling joy on Facebook, the other praying through pain in private. Both believed their husbands were the foundation of their families. Both believed in the power of faith, effort, and forgiveness. And both would learn, too late, that the people they trusted most were living lies they could not imagine. For now, their stories are still radiant, filled with laughter, devotion, and dreams. Because before the tragedy, they were simply women who loved deeply, who built homes filled with life, the calm before the silence. Every tragedy leaves clues long before it happens. They don't appear as screams or confessions, only whispers, a text at midnight, a glance that lasts too long, a silence that suddenly feels heavier than words. Both Shanann Watts and Sheri Coleman felt those whispers. They tried to explain them away, to pray them away, to love them away. But the storm was already forming behind closed doors. Shanann's uneasy summer. By the summer of 2018, Shanann's optimism had started to fracture. She was pregnant again, another child she called a miracle. She should have been celebrating, but Chris was distant. He stopped touching her. He stopped texting back. At first she blamed herself, then the pregnancy, then stress. In July, she traveled for work, sending him messages filled with hope. "I'm so excited for our future. We can do this." Most went unanswered. Friends noticed her voice change in videos, still smiling, but slower, careful, uncertain. She began writing long texts. "I don't know what's wrong with you. I feel like I'm married to a stranger." Her words read like someone pleading for the truth while still refusing to believe it. Chris had already disconnected. He was working out obsessively, eating differently, dressing sharper. When Shanann asked if he loved her, he replied, "I don't know." That was the warning disguised as honesty, one that didn't sound dangerous, only sad. But detachment can be deadlier than rage. Shanann felt the chill, but mistook it for stress. She never saw it for what it was: preparation. Sheri's growing distance. For Sheri Coleman, the warning signs were louder. She just didn't want to hear them. Her husband had changed long before the murders. He was often on the road, guarding celebrity preachers, surrounded by admiration and temptation. He grew critical, controlling, dismissive. Friends recalled that Sheri's smile started to fade at church gatherings. She joked about him being too busy for us, but behind the humor was fatigue. She told a friend she thought he was having an affair. She prayed for guidance, asking God to heal what was broken. When anonymous threat letters began arriving at their house, typed notes warning that the family would be killed if Chris didn't quit his job, Sheri panicked. She begged him to tell the ministry, to call police, to move. He assured her everything was under control. She believed him because faith teaches trust. But the letters weren't sent by an enemy. They were written by Chris himself. Every lie was disguised as protection. Every warning was buried under scripture. Parallel fear. Both women sensed danger, but from opposite directions. Shanann feared abandonment. Sheri feared external evil. Neither imagined the threat sleeping beside them. Text messages show Shanann reaching out to friends late at night. "Something's wrong. He's not the same." Her best friend told her to rest, that maybe he was stressed. She tried to believe that. Sheri confided in her parents that Chris seemed angry all the time. Her father suggested counseling. Her mother offered to visit. Sheri said no. She didn't want to embarrass him. She still believed loyalty could cure secrecy. Denial as survival. Denial isn't ignorance. It's hope wearing armor. Both women loved the men they married, not the men those husbands had become. They rationalized red flags as routine, work pressure, financial stress, exhaustion. And each time they forgave, they unknowingly fed the illusion that everything was still fine. They couldn't see the invisible competition building inside their husbands, between image and reality, fantasy and family, control and compassion. When control won, love no longer stood a chance. The final warnings. In her last week alive, Shanann told a friend, "I don't feel safe, but I don't know why." That intuition was her body sensing what her heart refused to accept. She wrote in a message, "He's not angry, he's just empty." Emptiness can be the loudest alarm in the world. Sheri's last warning came from within her own home. She told a neighbor she was sleeping with the lights on because the threats made her. But she still prayed with her sons before bed, still told them their father loved them. Her faith in him was her final act of devotion, and it cost her everything. What they couldn't see, Shanann and Sheri were not naive. They were hopeful. They believed love could soften distance and faith could fix fear. They read silence as stress, not strategy. They saw change and called it growth, not detachment. The truth was already in motion. Their husbands weren't drifting away. They were erasing the path back. By the time these women realized something was truly wrong, the lies had already become plans, and the homes they once built with love had turned into stages for deception. They didn't miss the signs because they weren't looking. They missed them because love makes you interpret warning lights as flickers of hope. And by the time the lights go out completely, it's already too late. The final days of any life rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary mornings, half-written messages, quiet plans for the weekend. For Shanann Watts and Sheri Coleman, those days looked like any other. Until, suddenly, they didn't. Shanann, the last trip. It was early August 2018. Shanann had just returned from a business trip to Arizona, a short weekend away for her job with Thrive. She'd been texting Chris for days, trying to reconnect, trying to believe that the man she loved was still there somewhere. But each message came back colder. She told her friend Nicole, "Something's not right with him. He's not the same." Chris's replies were clipped, robotic. When she told him she missed him, he said, "I don't know what I feel anymore." Still, she kept hoping. She told her coworkers she was going to fix things, that this trip would help her get clarity. On the flight home, she texted again, "I'll be home soon, can't wait to see you." He didn't answer. At 1:48 a.m., a friend dropped her off at the house. Security footage from a neighbor's camera shows her walking to the door, carrying her suitcase, unaware that the man waiting inside was already living a different life, one without her in it. The porch light flickered, the door closed, and Shanann Watts was never seen alive again. Sheri, the final night, 9 years earlier, in Columbia, Illinois, another woman was preparing for bed. Sheri Coleman had spent the evening with her sons, Garrett and Gavin. They'd watched TV, brushed their teeth, prayed together, and said goodnight. Outside, the house was quiet. Inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She'd been anxious for weeks about the threatening emails sent to their home. She told her mother she was sleeping with the lights on. She told a friend she felt watched. She asked her husband if they were safe. He said yes. That night, he told her he needed to leave early for the gym. She kissed him goodnight, believing him. She had no idea those threat letters came from his own hands. No idea that while she prayed for safety, he was plotting her death. 2 timelines, 1 pattern. Hundreds of miles apart, Two households lived their final hours in parallel. Two women holding on to faith while the men beside them rehearsed deception. Both believed their marriages were in trouble, not terminal. Both hoped communication could fix it. And both misread withdrawal as discomfort instead of danger. In Colorado, Shanann texted a final friend at 10:10 p.m. Arizona time. He said he doesn't want the baby. Her friend, half asleep, replied, "You'll talk when you're home. He loves you." That message was never read. In Illinois, Sheri went to bed believing the threats were over, that the police were investigating. She tucked her sons in, turned out the lights, and prayed for protection. Outside her window, the only thing moving was the wind and the quiet sound of her husband's car engine idling. Moments of normalcy. The cruelty of their stories lies in how ordinary the final hours were. Shanann's bag sat by the stairs, still packed from her trip. Her phone charged beside her bed. Her daughter's blankets lay folded neatly on the couch. Sheri's kitchen lights glowed faintly over untouched dishes. A Bible verse on the wall read, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Down the hall, her boys' backpacks waited for school. There was no struggle, no alarm, no final warning, only peace that wasn't real. Parallel fates. At 2 a.m., Shanann returned home. 3:30 a.m., Coleman left for the gym. Within those 90 minutes, two families were erased by two men who believed their lies had no consequences. Watts later told police that Shanann never screamed. Coleman claimed he came home to a crime scene he didn't cause. But evidence told another story, one of premeditation, of control, of betrayal, the final moments of innocence. Shanann's final phone call was to a friend who had no idea it would be the last. Her voice sounded tired, hopeful. Sheri's final words to her sons were, "I love you. God is watching over us." Both believed in tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. After the silence, when Shanann missed her doctor's appointment later that morning, friends knew something was wrong. When Sheri didn't answer her parents' calls, her father drove straight to the house. Within hours, both homes became crime scenes. Neighbors gathered in disbelief, and the world met two new names, names that would echo far beyond their small towns. They didn't die because they were weak. They died because they trusted, because they believed that love meant forgiveness, and that marriage meant safety. But some lies wear wedding rings, and sometimes the people who promise to protect you are the ones you need protection from. Every home has its own rhythm at night. The hum of an air conditioner, the soft shuffle of children sleeping, the sound of breath that fills the dark with peace. On those nights, in two different homes, that rhythm stopped, and silence became the loudest sound of all. The Coleman home, May 5, 2009. In Columbia, Illinois, the day had begun like any other. Chris Coleman was restless, rehearsing his story in his head. He had written himself into a corner. Months of fake threats, months of lies about danger that never existed. And now, the only way to keep the illusion alive was to make it real. At 5:43 a.m., neighbors heard the faint sound of a car engine. Coleman said he was heading to the gym. Security cameras captured him driving away, calm and deliberate. But by the time he made that drive, his family was already gone. Investigators later determined that Sheri and her sons had been killed hours earlier. There were no screams, no signs of forced entry, only stillness. Each child, still in bed, still under their blankets, as if they'd fallen asleep in safety. On the walls, red spray paint spelled messages. Punished. I told you this would happen. You have paid. They looked like the work of an intruder, but they were too precise, too theatrical. Coleman arrived back home around 6:45 a.m. and called his supervisor, crying into the phone. They're not breathing. Police arrived minutes later. The house was quiet. The lies were louder than ever. His story didn't make sense. The timeline too tight. The emotions too rehearsed. Detectives noticed there were no signs of panic, no sign of a break-in, just the perfect illusion of one. That morning, Coleman's life as a church protector ended and his performance as a victim began. The Watts home, August 13th, 2018. 9 years later, across the country, in a quiet Colorado suburb, Chris Watts stood in the dark, looking at the woman he once said he loved. Shanann had just returned from her trip. She was pregnant, exhausted, still hoping to talk things through. He had already made his choice. The affair, the fantasies, the lies, they had all led here. He later claimed it just happened, but nothing about that night was spontaneous. The house was silent. No argument heard by neighbors. No sound on the security camera. Only the cold, methodical ending of a story she thought could still be saved. When it was over, he stood in the quiet, surrounded by the proof of what he'd done. Then, like Coleman, he began cleaning, arranging, performing. He moved through the house as though nothing had changed, except everything had. He placed Shanann in the back of his work truck, along with blankets and tools. He drove for nearly an hour to an oil field, where he worked every morning. As the sun rose, the world began to wake up, unaware that inside his truck, the silence was heavier than the sky. The psychology of control. Both men acted not out of rage, but control. There were no crimes of passion here, only calculations. To Watts, killing was a way to erase responsibility, to restart his life as the man he pretended to be. To Coleman, it was a way to preserve image, to become the tragic victim of a story he'd written himself. They didn't see murder as destruction. They saw it as maintenance, the final step in keeping their illusions intact. And that is what makes their actions so chilling. Psychologists call this instrumental violence, when harm is committed not from emotion, but from purpose. The victims become objects in the killer's self-narrative. They're not people anymore. They're symbols of everything the liar wants to control or erase. Watts saw Shanann as the barrier between his fantasy and freedom. Coleman saw Sheri as the threat to his public identity. In both cases, the lie demanded a sacrifice, and that sacrifice was the very love they pretended to defend. The dawn after. When the sun rose, both men began their next performance, the act of innocence. Coleman called the police, his voice trembling just enough. Watts texted Shanann's phone, pretending to look for her. Each man entered the next stage of their lie, the cover story. They believed they could control reality the way they controlled perception. But reality does not cooperate with illusion forever. Neighbors would soon question timelines. Police would question motives. And the walls of their homes, once symbols of family, would soon become evidence. 2 houses, 1 truth, different years, different states, different victims, but the same anatomy of betrayal. 2 men who believed that if they could silence the truth, they could start over. 2 homes where trust turned fatal, and 2 women who went to sleep thinking love would protect them, only to wake up inside the darkest chapter of someone else's story. The night of the murders wasn't an explosion. It was an erasure, the quiet dismantling of two lives built on love, undone by lies. And as the sun came up, both killers stepped into the same delusion that the world might believe them. But truth was already awake. When the truth finally begins to surface, it doesn't roar. It arrives quietly, through unanswered calls, a doorbell that goes unanswered, a friend's growing sense of dread. That was how both stories began to unravel, through small acts of care that refused to give up when the liars thought they could still control the story. The morning of August 13th, 2018, Colorado. It started with a message that went unanswered. Shanann's friend, Nicole Atkinson, had dropped her off at home the night before, around 1:48 a.m., after their business trip to Arizona. When Shanann didn't reply to her text that morning, Nicole knew something was wrong. Shanann always answered. She was a mother of two and pregnant with a third. Silence wasn't normal. Nicole tried again. No response. Then she called Chris Watts. He said Shanann had taken the kids on a play date, but her car was still in the garage. Her purse, phone, medication, everything inside the house. By early afternoon, Nicole called the police for a welfare check. Body cam footage from that day would later show her pacing the driveway, heart pounding, voice trembling. Chris arrived minutes later, strangely calm, holding his phone, unlocking doors one by one, as if walking through a museum of his own lies. Inside, the house was spotless. Too spotless. Beds made, toys arranged. No sign of struggle, just absence. Detectives noticed something odd. The bed sheets were missing from the master bedroom. Chris said Shanann had probably taken them to wash. They didn't believe him. A neighbor pulled the police aside, whispering that Chris was acting strangely. He said, "He's not himself. He never talks that much." That footage would later become the first crack in Chris Watts' illusion of innocence. The morning of May 5, 2009, Illinois, almost a decade earlier, Sheri Coleman's parents were feeling the same rising panic. They had tried calling her all morning. No answer. She always answered. Her father, Ron King, finally decided to drive to the house. When he arrived, the windows were dark, the doors locked. He called 911. Officers entered through a window. Inside was a scene of eerie calm. The boys' backpacks were ready for school. Breakfast dishes in the sink. Cartoons still recorded on the DVR. But upstairs, the silence was unbearable. Ron King found his daughter and grandsons. Moments later, his scream filled the quiet house. Police rushed in, trying to make sense of what they saw. There was no forced entry, no robbery, no chaos, just deliberate destruction. Within an hour, the home was taped off, and the same church community that had once celebrated the Colemans was now praying for answers they already feared. When detectives contacted Chris Coleman at the gym, his voice cracked on the phone. He claimed he was rushing home. But the way he spoke, the phrasing, the pace felt off. Trained investigators know grief has rhythm. It had choreography. By the time he arrived, he was already performing his next role, the grieving husband and father. 2 calls, 1 pattern. In both stories, the killers underestimated empathy. They thought they could lie and move on, that absence could be explained. But love doesn't forget. Love looks for you when you disappear. It wasn't police or technology that broke their illusions first. It was friendship. It was family. It was the people who refused to believe convenient lies. Nicole Atkinson in Colorado. Ron and Connie King in Illinois. Two families that refused to let silence be an answer. The collapse of the lie. By evening, both men were standing in the glare of police lights, surrounded by suspicion. Chris Watts tried to act calm, answering questions, talking to the media, folding his arms to contain his nerves. He told cameras, "I just want them back. I just want them safe." He didn't realize the world could already see through him. Chris Coleman told detectives he was the target of a hate campaign. He quoted Bible verses and claimed divine protection. But investigators were already connecting the dots. The fake emails, the computer IP address, the timeline that didn't match. Both killers had spent months rehearsing their cover stories. But truth doesn't need rehearsal, and as evidence started to surface, their performances began to collapse. The turning point. For Watts, the turning point came when police found the GPS data from his truck, showing a route to the oil field. For Coleman, it came when forensic analysts traced the threatening emails back to his own laptop. The lies they built to protect themselves became the proof that destroyed them. The truth was no longer a theory. It was data, time-stamped, and undeniable. Aftermath of discovery. The discovery of the victims shattered entire communities. In Colorado, neighbors stood in silence as police cars lined the street. The playground where Bella and Celeste used to laugh became a memorial of candles and stuffed animals. In Illinois, church members gathered for vigils, struggling to reconcile faith with betrayal. They lit candles under the steeple where Chris Coleman once preached security. Now that same light illuminated the cracks in his lies. For both families, disbelief became grief overnight. And grief, in time, became a demand for justice. What discovery means? Discovery isn't just finding what happened. It's facing what you never wanted to believe. For Shanann and Sheri's loved ones, discovery meant realizing that the monster wasn't outside the home. He was sitting at the dinner table. And for both killers, discovery meant losing the one thing they valued most: control. Because once the truth steps into the light, lies no longer have anywhere left to hide. When lies end, truth begins its own quiet work, the work of remembrance, justice, and healing. For the families of Shanann Watts and Sheri Coleman, that work began the moment police said the words they already feared. "We found them." But from that moment on, their stories stopped belonging to the men who silenced them. They became stories of strength, told by those who refused to let their memories fade beneath the weight of tragedy. Justice for Shanann. In August 2018, the case of Chris Watts unfolded in front of the entire world. For weeks, the nation watched as a man who once claimed innocence confessed to killing his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. The shock was collective, not only because of what he did, but because of how normal he looked doing it. When the truth came out, Shanann's family, Frank and Sandy Ruzek, stood in the courtroom, holding each other for strength. Her father spoke softly, tears steady, but his voice firm. "We loved Shanann and those little girls with all our hearts. We trusted you." There were no screams, no vengeance, just grief expressed through quiet dignity. They didn't want revenge, they wanted truth. And truth, at last, was undeniable. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, waking each day inside the silence he created. For the Rusek family, justice didn't mean closure, it meant purpose. They began advocating for awareness of emotional abuse, of red flags often ignored. They asked the world not just to remember what happened, but to listen to the warning signs that come before it. Shanann's mother said in an interview, "She was light. She shared her life online because she wanted to help others. I just hope people remember her that way." And they do. To this day, her videos, her laughter, her energy all still live online. Reminders of what love really looks like. Justice for Sheri. For Sheri Coleman's family, justice came slower, but ended the same way, with truth overpowering image. The trial in 2011 revealed what investigators had already known. The threatening emails, the affair, the staged crime scene, all of it created by Chris Coleman himself. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Sheri's mother weeping softly. Her father closed his eyes, whispering a prayer. Coleman was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms with no chance of parole. He still maintains his innocence. But the truth doesn't need his permission to exist. The King family, Sheri's parents, turned their grief into advocacy. They started speaking publicly about hidden abuse, religious manipulation, and the danger of image-based relationships. Sheri's father said, "My daughter believed in love and faith. She just didn't know that sometimes evil hides behind both." Today, a memorial stands in Columbia, Illinois, in honor of Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin. A reminder that faith is not the same as blindness, and that trust must be earned, not performed. The public reckoning. Both cases sparked conversations far beyond their towns. People began asking the same haunting question: how can someone who looks so normal be capable of such horror? Psychologists called it mask behavior. Sociologists called it image addiction. But to the families, it was simpler. These men cared more about appearance than love. And the women who died, Shanann and Sheri, represented everything real: warmth, resilience, truth. Their killers couldn't live up to that reality, so they tried to erase it. But erasure never works. It only amplifies what's gone. Courage in their names. The legacy of both women isn't tragedy, it's transformation. Their families rebuilt their lives around courage, using their stories to teach others that control disguised as love is not love at all. Shanann's family launched awareness campaigns about relationship red flags, emotional withdrawal, isolation, manipulation, sudden personality changes. Sheri's church community started safety programs for women in faith-based relationships who fear speaking up. Their voices echo in these efforts, even in silence. Because remembrance isn't about repeating the pain, it's about preventing it. Lessons the world learned. Their stories reveal something uncomfortable, but necessary. Evil rarely enters shouting. It walks in smiling. It hides in routine. It says, "I love you" with one breath, and plans betrayal with the next. But it also shows something brighter, that love, even when silenced, still leaves a trace. Every person who said Shanann's name, who lit a candle for Sheri and her boys, kept their memory louder than the lies that ended them. They may have been silenced once, but through truth, they continue to speak. The unfinished work of truth. Justice can punish, but only truth can heal. And that's why these stories matter, because for every Shanann and Sheri, there are others still believing that love means endurance. that silence keeps the peace. It doesn't. Silence only protects the liar. Speaking truth, even when it's painful, protects the living. That is their legacy. That is their voice. Some stories end with silence. Others echo forever. The lives of Shanann Watts and Sheri Coleman did not fade when their voices were taken. Their laughter still plays in old videos. Their words still live in text messages, and their love still shapes the people who remember them. Evil tried to erase them, but love wrote them into history instead. Echoes of a smile. Watch Shanann in her home videos and you'll see energy, not perfection, but persistence. She pushed through illness, through exhaustion, through judgment, just to keep her family together. When she smiled, it wasn't to prove her life was perfect. It was to remind herself that it was worth fighting for. Her final months weren't just about fear. They were about effort. Every message she sent, every trip she took, every plan she made was a declaration that she still believed in love. And that belief, even when betrayed, still shines brighter than the lie that tried to destroy it. SP. Sheri Coleman lived by faith, and that faith never left her. She taught her sons kindness, loyalty, respect, lessons written in love, not religion. She believed goodness could heal anything, and even in her final days, she clung to that hope. In her prayers, she wasn't asking for escape. She was asking for protection for her children, her home, her family. She never knew that the evil she feared was already standing beside her. But her faith, that light, remains unbroken. The weight of trust. Both women represent something deeper than tragedy. They remind us of how powerful trust is and how devastating it is when that trust is betrayed. Their lives teach us that evil doesn't always appear violent or angry. Sometimes it appears patient, polite, gentle. Sometimes it hides behind a smile, a handshake, or a wedding vow. The warning isn't to fear love, it's to understand it. Because real love doesn't demand silence. It doesn't hide truth. It doesn't need to be proven by control. Real love is honesty, even when honesty hurts. That's what Shanann and Sheri gave. That's what their killers could never understand. The mirror we all face. When the world saw these cases unfold, we weren't just watching the downfall of two men. We were watching a mirror, one that showed how society often misses the quiet warning signs. We value appearance over reality. We scroll through perfect photos and call it happiness. We confuse control with devotion, silence with peace, and performance with love. These stories force us to look deeper, to ask harder questions, to see the difference between who someone is and what they pretend to be. What remains? Years have passed, but their names still mean something. Shanann Watts, Bella, Celeste, Nico, Sheri, Coleman, Garrett, Gavin. Each name is a story of love cut short, but also of truth that could not be buried. Their families keep them alive by speaking, by sharing, by reminding the world that silence is never safety. They remind us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through those who refuse to forget. Reflection. Both killers believed they could rewrite the truth, but time has proven otherwise. Their lies may have silenced voices, but they could not erase meaning. The stories of Shanann and Sheri endure because truth always finds a way to be heard, through love, through memory, through every person who says their names with compassion. And perhaps that's the final justice, that the truth outlived the lies. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the strength found in love and the danger of silence, subscribe to Dark Truths, True Crime Stories, Every week, we explore the hidden psychology behind real crimes, not for fear, but for understanding. Like this video if you believe their stories deserve to be remembered. Comment below what lesson from Shanann and Sheri's lives will stay with you the most. Share this documentary to help others recognize the warning signs that love should never hide behind lies. Because truth, once spoken, never dies. And in their memory, it continues to speak.